I feel as if some of my white allies don't truly understand racism. I left South Carolina on the East Coast in the South and came over to Washington State on the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest. And many white people here don't realize they are very much as just as racist as the freaking Deep South. But for some reason, they have this belief that they call themselves allies or they tweet out hashtag Black Lives Matter that you are suddenly not a racist. Well, let me give you a long video to explain to you how some of you are actually worse than Klansmen. This is coming from somebody who came from the South. South Carolina, 40% of your slaves who came through those slave ports on ships, they came in through the port of Charleston. So the one person you would think would understand anti-black racism would be somebody who has a lineage directly tied to that, right? So let me go ahead and give you a little bit of a crash course. Many of you think that it takes someone wearing some white sheets or goose stepping or throwing out some certain salutes to be a racist, and that's not the case. Many of you can be racist just by demographics. And let me give you examples. I don't mean anything by skin color. I mean location. Location. Now, based on that, if you go on the South, right, you will get people who are openly racist, who will tell you to your face they don't like you because you're black. But then you come over to the West Coast and the North, you will find people who think that because you say things nicely, but you're saying essentially the exact same thing as a Klansman, that you are not a racist. You are just being a polite racist. Like, for example, when people in the North or the West Coast, when they criticize rap music, I want you to understand rap music is a stand-in for black people. When they criticize Chicago, that is a stand-in for black people. When they criticize Black Lives Matter, you see this even on the West Coast and also in the North. That is a stand-in for Black Lives Matter. When you get white feminists who go out of their way to target black men, that is a way of targeting black people without directly targeting black people. You are doing it under the guise of feminism. Or when you get somebody who says, oh, black people are so problematic towards the LGBT community, even though we have a higher percent of gay men than white people, when you go out of your way to target 13% of your population, even though by demographic sakes, it's probably mostly white people who are the problem there. When you go out of your way to target people like Dave Chappelle, freaking Kevin Hart, even though you allow Eminem to actually perform at the Super Bowl halftime show, and before you even comment, I'm going to have you justify every lyric, every song in which he says something anti-gay. All right? If you're going to allow all that, but then target Dave Chappelle, Kevin Hart, and other black people, and allow Joe Rogan to still operate, freely-nilly. Joe Rogan has not been attacked. Dave Chappelle has been. If you can, basically ignore a black man being attacked over jokes, but you allow Joe Rogan and Eminem to go about their lives, even though Joe Rogan has caused substantially more damage than Dave Chappelle ever did for numerous issues. If you can allow that, then don't come at black people over that issue. See, that's the kind of anti-black racism that people don't recognize, because it is a racism that has come disguised as benevolence. See, the West Coast and North racism is always disguised as benevolence, or it's always disguised as ignorance. Like, for example, I had a situation in which you had, I was a part of a black organization, supposed to be black led. And we had white allies who's supposed to be working side by side with us as an auxiliary. They're supposed to bag back when we step forward. They started mentioning things like trees and animals. And it's like, this organization is about what was happening to black people in terms of the police and white supremacy and all that stuff. I'm not saying that we can't discuss that kind of stuff. What I am saying is, Saeed Wakim in Washington State was unalived by a freaking police officer. You had Manny Ellis unalived by a police officer in Tacoma. You had Andrea Cherner in Washington State. You had so many people right here in the state and all across the country who have been unalived by police officers, and you're mentioning trees. See, that's another way of undermining black folks that many white people don't recognize. It happens so often in many black-led organizations. I'll give you another example. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, it started out as a good thing. But then what happened was certain special interest groups, they got involved and started diluting the message. Then it became a black man versus black woman, and then a black community versus the black LGBT thing. They started pitting parts of the black community against each other, and many of the people who were the benefactors were actually white people, coming to find out. See, white people were instigating all kinds of arguments within the black community. They set up these straw mans like Black Lives Matter. They'll set up these speaking straw mans like certain parts or certain identities, and then they will use them as weapons. See, that's a form of racism that happens so often on the West Coast that many people don't recognize. But I see all the time. And many people don't recognize it because you're not from where I'm from. You don't understand white supremacy in a way that people like me, someone from like one of those countries in the African diaspora or some other parts would actually get it, because you live it. So you have to look for it. Right? And that's why whenever I make a call about an organization or like a freaking movement, you get people who will resist against me, right? But then I'll end up being right. And then they won't come back and actually say, you know what, you were right. See, it's not just the racism that are the microaggressions, it's the stubbornness to change. I could tell a white person right here in Washington State, that's kind of racist, right? And they will tell me, well, it's not. I went to the Black Lives Matter protests. I support black people. They will start trying to read off their resume to excuse behavior. It happens. That happens even with police officers. As soon as you accuse them of any kind of misconduct, it doesn't matter if it's actually true or not. They'll say, well, listen, I make donations to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I saved the kitty. That's a form of racism in which you do a bunch of things, you complete a bunch of freaking objectives so that you can forever excuse yourself if you happen to slip up. Instead of working on yourself, you want to just do a bunch of accomplishments, a bunch of symbolic gestures, showing up to a freaking march, supporting a freaking statue, posting Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter on freaking Facebook or Twitter. That doesn't actually help anything. That does nothing. That requires no effort, and that's why so many people on the West Coast and also in the North, they prefer that, because they think that doing one action means you stopped all the racism, right? I tweeted out Black Lives Matter, all the racism is done, guys. Or you'll get people who will feign ignorance, like they don't know that something is freaking racist, right? So I had a scenario in which I had an individual question reparations, insult the Black Panther Party right to my face, even though I told them I'm a legacy Panther. Well, I was a legacy Panther, right? And then just started saying a bunch of other stuff that was anti-black. And I'm like, if you said this to any other black person, right, they would call you a racist. But then after that freaking event, I was the one that was put on trial. Well, you got to understand, this person hangs around a bunch of freaking black people. That doesn't mean you're not a racist. Hanging around a bunch of black folks doesn't mean anything. Donald Sterling, who owned at one point the LA Clippers, he hired black folks. He hung around a whole lot of them, but he didn't like us. Hulk Hogan did a whole bunch of wrestling matches with black people and did tag team matches with freaking Booker T. But he said some very interesting things about black people behind closed doors. See, that's what I mean about the just marking off objectives. Hey, I've done this, so therefore forever I can't be this. It doesn't work that way. You could be anti-sexist your entire life, but if you're sexist to a woman, in that moment, you're still a sexist. It doesn't matter. And they only apply this selective ignorance, this selective objective gathering with us. No other group experiences this. You couldn't do this to freaking Jewish people, Asian people, Hispanic people, you name it. You couldn't do it to anybody else but us. And the disrespect that these people show us by thinking that you can say the same things that the white supremacists say, but just say it nicely, that makes you even more racist. I hope you realize that. And thus concludes my rant and my lesson. Hope y'all pay attention.